Welcome to the Curve Thought Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Rhlamfo. So today we're going to be talking about nuance in particular, or rather the lack thereof, as seems to characterize the majority of our public discourse nowadays. It seems that it used to be the case that everybody had a predisposed belief, right? The lens at which you view the world came with a particular subset of pre-existing beliefs, and through that lens you find information within the world in order to justify that belief, creating a small feedback loop. Strengthens the belief, which strengthens the lens with which you view the world. That lens then finds further corroborating evidence for the underlying belief, and so on and so forth. So a good example of this would be, say for example, when I used to be a Christian, my pre-existing belief, pre-existing notion was the fact that God exists and handles everything that happens in the world, and God is ultimately good. Therefore, anything that I viewed as good through that lens would further go to justifying the underlying belief that God certainly is good in terms of what he does, which re-strengthens the lens, and I would look for more confirming evidence of the fact that God is good. Right now, so far so good. All of us do this to some degree. It's basically impossible to escape as a human being, having that predilection towards your own preconceived notions. But nowadays something's changed, and the change that I've noticed is the fact that it seems people don't even need to go the additional step of trying to find evidence for why they believe what they believe. Nowadays, it seems that the general track or the accepted line of reasoning is that you come into a situation already holding a belief, but you don't even need anything to confirm that belief. You don't look for a fact, you don't look for confirming evidence, you don't look for a way for your belief to make sense. You already think it makes sense, and you're done. And everybody who disagrees with you is either evil, uninformed, or some combination of the two. A good example of this will be consider Zuma defenders in our country right now. Most people accept to some reasonable degree that the man is corrupt, the man has to go, the man is not served at the behest and will of the people. However, people who still support and defend the president will find themselves in a situation where they will not even consider any good reasons for why they should continue to supporting the man in the face of, mountains of disconfirming evidence. But they simply say, nah, everything that comes on the other side is effectively propaganda, cooked up in some white man's laboratory, or some white man's boardroom rather, in order to try and discredit the president and capture the ANC or the state in that fashion. And you'll find that people who hold this line of reasoning literally cannot bring up any actual evidence towards this, right? And you can go and look. People say this ad nauseum. All the Zuma defenders will ardently say that all the books, journalistic articles, emails, etc., implicating the president in particular wrongdoing doesn't really matter because they view it as conspiracy and propaganda. Now, I know a lot of you will be thinking that, well, of course people do this, but it's not necessarily a new phenomenon. This isn't something that simply cropped out of nowhere. People have been hearkening to the conspiracy defense for literally centuries now. So what makes it different in this particular case? And I think what makes it different in this particular case is that it's not just this case. It's not just Zuma defenders behaving this way. It's basically everyone. For instance, there was a video I was watching. I'm not sure if many of you know a guy, an internet provocateur known as Milo Yiannopoulos. Truly, genuinely awful human being. But there was a protest against Milo Yiannopoulos at, I think it was the University of Berkeley, in America. And whilst the people were there, protesting, trying to get Milo deplatformed, making sure that he doesn't speak at the event, Some enterprising alt-right dude decided to interview these protesters, right? So he walks around with his camera, interviewing people, asking them, yo, why are you here? Why are you stridently against this Milo dude? What's your beef? What's your issue? And what was really interesting to note was the fact that, with the exception of maybe 6 people that he came across, the vast majority of people that he interviewed and said, what did Milo say that you have a problem with? What did he say that put you in this position of direct opposition to him? What did he do that, in order to justify the narrative you're bringing against him? And the most of them couldn't actually come out with concrete facts. Like, the line was always the same. Like, no, he's a homophobe, which was kind of weird given he's gay. Not a defense of Milo, by the way, guys. I will never defend that guy. But people say he's a homophobe, he's a racist, he's transphobic, and he's just overall a horribly bigoted person. All of which are true, by the way. If it'll take you 25 seconds of Google to figure this out. But when actually pressed on the matter as to what did he say and or do that inspired in you a reaction to the degree where you were willing to come out of your day and protest this man, you were willing to say, okay, enough is enough, this man must be stopped at all costs. And most of them couldn't actually find justification for their predisposed belief. Obviously, this is happening with Donald Trump to a very large degree. But, and just in general, the world right now doesn't seem to exist in a sphere of facts. It seems the complaints about us being post-factual are ringing more and more true on a near daily basis. Consider this, right? If you're in a general Facebook group, or if you're on a WhatsApp group or whatever, and somebody has a particular view, or they have a particular view as expressed, and their recommendation for why they hold that view is some article that they read somewhere, right? Which, most of the time they had the view in advance. The article just helps corroborate it, which is fine. That's kind of what we want, is people searching for justifications for their views. But then somebody will post the article, post a YouTube video or a link or whatever, describing in some detail a belief that they have. And if you disagree with it and you say, no, I don't agree necessarily with what's being painted out here, let's have a discussion. Let's actually debate why you think the way you think. Most times nowadays, that's not actually met with anything concrete. People seem somewhat allergic to trying to actually have open conversations in that way. Or to try and have conversations that might have a reliable chance of changing their mind on any given subject. This seems to be anathema in 2017 discourse. Nobody wants to engage in a conversation where the likelihood of them changing their mind is even approaches 50%. People are like, nah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to try and engage you on these points. I challenge all of you to actually think about this. Think about the last time that you were in conversation with somebody. They express a view. You said, I don't necessarily think that view is true. And then they responded with, well, okay, the reason why this view is actually valid is because there are these set of facts derived from this particular study that I read, which is in turn, that particular study references another data set which is legitimate in some concrete way. No, most people just say, oh, I heard about it somewhere, or, I was listening to this thing. Or even better yet, even if people do actually engage with evidence, their predisposed blinders literally make them unable to see new evidence in that particular light, even if there's nothing wrong with the evidence. So I'll give you an interesting example of how this can cut out in both directions regarding the same subject matter. Those of you that are South African will very much know about this new book called The President's Keepers. Fairly important book written by Jacques Pau, detailing the various misdeeds of our president with regards to the security cluster and how he's gone out of his way to ensure that there is nobody left in the country that can actually adequately prosecute him, either driving out those competent enough to prosecute him, or ensuring that those that are competent enough to prosecute him are completely loyal to him, so have no stomach to do so. Anyway, so this book exists. It comes out. It's a big seller. And it didn't really take long before the and the Zumites started saying, nah, this is obviously this is post-colonial propaganda by white people trying to discredit the president. And an interesting way this played out, this was 2 days ago, I think. I was at the bookstore in which I work at Exclusive Books in Centurion. And while I was there, there was one gentleman I was speaking to, and we were talking about the book, talking about the various allegations into the president. And there was a specific, he wanted a book about Zuma not written by a white man. And I was like, why? Does it really, if the allegations against the man are true, does it really matter the color of the skin of the person that compiled the evidence? And in his view, it mattered. We discussed this for a while. And then I asked him point blank. I was like, because he said at some point that this is primarily propaganda. And I said, have you read the book? And he said, yes, he actually had read the book. And I said, okay, cool. Having read the book, can you point to specific places within the book that lend credence to your argument that this is all propaganda? That lend credence to your belief, your predisposed belief, that it's not possible for a white man to have genuine gripes against a black leader that have nothing to do with racial animus. Can you point to an example of this? And he was unable to, and he got a little bit huffy with me, and he left. Nary a word said afterwards. But that interaction really struck me, because the man was full of passion, full of vigor, very spirited discussion, up until the point where I asked, can you justify any of what you're saying? And then the wind sort of evaporates from the man's sails and he has to leave. And then later that very same day, there's another woman that I was speaking to. Now, she was much more excited about this book. She's like, yes, she wants President's Keepers. She wants to get involved. She wants to know what's happening. And I said, okay, great. But at the time, we didn't necessarily have stock of the book. So I inquired, okay, I can interest you in a couple of other books that have, pretty revelatory stances on the president, pretty damning conclusions and damning findings against them in the face of the evidence that's there. But other books exist right now. We were speaking about the book called A Simple Man by Ronnie Kasrils, the ex-ANC or struggle veteran who used to head up our intelligence services as intelligence minister, I believe up until 2007, 2008, around that time. Anyway, so I was telling her that having read the majority of both the books, I find that the more engaging narrative is the Simple Man one, the one written by Ronnie Kasrils. And I think that book, even though it might be, devoid is the wrong word, it might lack the overwhelming mountain of evidence available in the President's Keepers, I think it does a better job of explaining why this person is terrible for our democracy. Apart from the simple facts of the matter at hand of the crimes he's committed and the way he's finessed us and the way he's destroyed our institutions, but simply on the nature of the man in and of himself, why he's terrible for the democracy. So I was saying to her, no, I actually think that it probably might be better to first read A Simple Man and then read A President's Keepers, and then you can conclude for yourself in a much more, like, the actions that take place in the latter book will make a lot more sense with the insights gained from the former. And then she said, no, that can't possibly be true, given that The President's Keepers, this is the book. This is where all the truth is, right? There's nothing more true than this, I think, is what she said, paraphrasing, obviously. But that's more or less the gist of what she said, very close to verbatim. She said that this is the most true book. So I said to her, no, there is truth in both books, easily corroboratable evidence in both books. One doesn't necessarily meet a higher standard of evidence than the other, simply because, one is more heavily focused on the security cluster, doesn't change anything in that regard. And she said, no, that can't possibly be true. She knows that The President's Keepers contains, in terms of its factual prowess, more information that's relevant than A Simple Man. So then I asked her point blank, have you read either of the books? And she said no. And what struck me was when she said no, in my mind, that should have immediately been the moment where she says, oh, I see what you mean. I'll have to read the books first, see what they're about, try and get an understanding of what's going on in the background. But instead, she just doubled down and said, I haven't read either of them, but I know that this one is more true than the other one. And she also left thereafter. So this is the exact same book right? Being viewed in two wildly different ways by different people. And the common thread between the different views is the lack of nuanced reasoning about why that view was held. No one was actually willing to sit down and say, okay, I hold these views because of these reasons, and actually extrapolate from that, not even from necessarily from first principles, but just explain their thought process as to why they got to where they got to, right? Now, this is obviously crazy when it comes to these particular books, but it happens, with different products. But it's more and more prevalent that it just happens in terms of what we believe in terms of discourse. Pick any given issue that's contentious in the moment in our country. So, free higher education, or a higher minimum wage, or social grants as a necessity in post-apartheid South Africa. Pick an issue, and I guarantee the vast majority of the people that have extremely powerful views on the subject won't actually be in contact with either the reality of the situation, or even just pure statistics or pure numbers, or just valid reasons beyond talking points. Because now we seem to exist in a world where if you don't have a soundbite, you can't necessarily be taken as being credible. If you don't have a soundbite, you don't have a scandal, you don't have something spicy that I can tweet about, suddenly you're not a serious person. You're not a serious interlocutor, and we don't have to regard your views as being real, even though most of the people that have either the sound bites, the scandal, or the Twitter punch tend not to actually be in contact with the facts, which is weird. So this is more or less it's a small complaint episode, I suppose, but it's an attempt to try and get us to honestly and earnestly ask ourselves why we believe what we believe. And ask yourself how often, you should probe how often you do this. Probe yourself, how often do you actually know why you believe in a particular way? So an example from my side is during the Black Monday protests from AfriForum members regarding farm murders all across the country. I remember speaking to a very close friend of mine who I'll be having on the podcast sometime soon. But we were speaking about this. He's an Afrikaans man, by the way. And one of the things that I said to him, because we were arguing back and forth about this, and we were speaking about the numbers, because he was saying that for the longest time he'd always believed that the amount of farm murders was approaching, I think he mentioned something like the 100,000s or something. I'm not sure if he mentioned 100,000s or millions, but the actual number of farm murders, just if anybody's curious, since 1990 is 1,652, I think, and counting, obviously. And he thought the number was way higher. And when we discussed this and I showed him the actual numbers, he could not for the life of him understand why it was the case that he believed what he believed up until this point. Even though when he saw the numbers, he was instantly disabused of that notion. He was like, oh, obviously I can't have been correct before, given that the facts at hand don't square with what I thought about them. And as we were speaking about this, I was saying to him, I also went hyperbolic in the opposite direction, because I said to him that one of the reasons people are frustrated with these AfriForum things, with AfriForum making a big deal of the farm murders, not that they're not a big deal. Murder is a big deal, always, all the time. But one of the reasons why people are frustrated about this is what I said to him was that I don't know if I've ever encountered an Afrikaans person discuss crime and then they do not bring up farm murders, right? And he said to me, that can't possibly be true. And I said, nope, that's 100% true. In my experience, every Afrikaans person I've talked to where crime comes up, somebody's going to mention farm murders. And at the time that I said it, I felt completely validated and justified in that belief. But moments after that conversation, after we parted ways, I started really thinking about it. And I was like, no, he's right. This can't possibly be true. And in probing my own memory more deeply, it became easily apparent that that wasn't true. But if you'd asked me moments before I said that, whether or not that's true, I would have said, yes, of course that's true. I know this for a fact, given what I know about my own experience and how I've interacted with people regarding this set of facts. So this is, again, a situation in which you would not necessarily think of yourself as being primed to believe a particular narrative over another. You would think yourself as always being in possession of the correct set of facts and reasoning more honestly than your people that disagree with you based on that available set of facts. But then once you probe what you actually think about a subject, you'll find that no, there are holes in what you think as well. The way we conceive of the world isn't as nuanced as we'd like to believe. And that there's always space for you to actually expand upon where your beliefs stemmed from and where they lead to. So the question that we always have to ask ourselves is, why do you believe what you believe? And moreover, would you be willing to change and amend your beliefs if the underlying reasons for them should change? So for instance, if I'm a person who tends to believe that there was a crash in Roswell in America, that aliens landed on our planet, and I've believed this for the entirety of my life, if I go to Roswell, will I change my mind? Because a depressingly small number of people, I think, would actually change their minds in that context, or at least right now. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have been much more optimistic on this score. But right now, it feels like there's virtually no evidence that moves the general person away from their positions. Unless catastrophe. Catastrophe seems to be the only reliable mechanism for shifting people's belief systems. But in the absence of that, just an individual person deciding to probe their beliefs, adjust, amend, and change them as required based on the evidence alone, seems to be a dying art. It seems like the mere ability to be nuanced is a craft that no longer is being taught. You know? Moreover, it seems like people are hostile to the idea of nuance. People are hostile to the idea of multifaceted answers or complex answers to problems that they have. And I think it has a lot to do with us as humans in terms of our psychology. We thrive off of having, not accurate knowledge, but we thrive off of the feeling of having knowledge. We thrive over mastering the unknown. We thrive in an environment where we feel that there are no open-ended questions, but fairly strictly simple answers. Telling a person who asks a particular, think about it, like when you ask a question, nothing is more depressing to hear as a preamble to the answer you desire than hearing it depends, or it depends on how you frame it, or let's look at it in a new way. Like, people hate that shit with all their heart. They're like, oh, come on, I just wanted a simple, straight up and down answer. I didn't want you to come in here and complicate my life, forcing me to have to think about the various ways in which what you're saying might be true in one context but not true in another context. People want a straight up and down, yes, that's the case. So being human and having to grapple with the fact that we are not psychologically primed to handle the unknown very well, but also knowing that if you want to genuinely get to the truth of things, you're always accepting of some level of unknowns. There's a principle in science where people say science is actually not about finding out what's true. It's about finding out what's probable and what's not probable. Because technically anything is possible. So in principle, anything could be true, but not everything is highly probable. So the job of human beings in terms of our discovery of the world and navigating the world as we search for truth is figuring out what's more probable, what's more likely, and ruling out things that are less probable and less likely. Doing so obviously requires us to, at certain points, throw our hands up and declare that there are certain things we just cannot know. But on the balance of probabilities, one option is more likely than the other. But doing so, in terms of general conversation, usually has you derided as being a fence sitter or lacking in conviction, because people like strong, firm answers. There's a reason why authoritarians and populism in general, I think, is back on the upswing in the world. And I think it probably has to do with this fact, the fact that nuance is going out of the window. And without nuance, if if you remove nuance from the table, right, and you just say, you strictly say that you would rather deal with a person who has more absolutist principles about how the world functions and about what they should be doing in the world, then you can understand why somebody would prefer a Zuma over Mbeki, why somebody would prefer excuse me, a Trump over Obama. Because you want somebody to stand up with certainty, conviction, and say this is the way things are. What you really don't want is somebody saying, I think this is the way things are, but I actually don't know. I'll have to go and see. I'll have to go and find out. I'll have to go and check. And I might be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to have to change basically everything about how I view the world. That's, to most people, a abhorrent position to take. Because it means that now I have to do, as an individual, the work of literally changing who I am based on what I believe. And for most people, the idea of not being in permanent contact with who they feel they are based on those sets of beliefs is worse than death. Some people would literally rather die than change their minds. That's where we are kind of in the universe around us, in the world around us, is that it's never acceptable to say, oh, I was wrong, you were right, and it's cool, I'm going to change my mind on this. Nope, people will take their wrongness to the grave, or people will just say, we have a difference of opinion. And difference in opinions can exist, but sometimes when you have a difference, one side is right. Not all sides of the story are correct. Both sides is not an actually actively good way to look at the world. If you say, well, both sides have merits, it's like, no, one side has better merits than the other more often than not, but it's very rarely 100% merit, which does also mean that you have to keep yourself at bay. If you can demonstrate that you're correct over another individual, you still have to sometimes listen to them and say that I might be completely correct within the context that we're discussing, but they might have more information about another situation which infringes upon my rightness in this situation. Basically, we're in this state of life right now where we're living in black and white, pure binaries. It's either you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong. And obviously, this doesn't seem to be working for the world around us. And nuance really isn't that difficult to achieve. It's not that hard to say, okay, I'm not sure about something. Let me get a greater scope on it. Let me find out more. Before I'm willing to commit to a particular position, let me ensure that all given considerations are in place first, and then I can assign probabilities. Remember, truth has very little to do with certainties. It's all about probabilities. What is more likely to be true than something else? Very few things are black and white, so let's not treat our politics, our world, let's not treat our damn reality as if it is. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. If you enjoyed what you heard, you can like us on YouTube, share on your favorite social media, and most importantly, give us feedback. Tell us what you liked, tell us what you didn't like, and tell us what you'd like to hear in future. But above all, give yourself a pat on the back and continue to have interesting conversations.